walked outside Manchester to speak at a breakfast. After his remarks, he took questions from the audience.
Yes, sir, over here. You get excited and you want to support me.
Well, in addition to that, yes. when I hear you speak, as I did in Nashville a few weeks ago, you project a sense of optimism for the country's future that is not necessarily shared, it doesn't seem, perhaps, by some of your competitors for the nomination. So I wanted to ask you, if you would, what your reaction to that is.
Well, look, this is. I wish more of my colleagues, not that I suggest everyone run for president. I mean, I realize that would overwhelm a place like New Hampshire, I suppose. But it's a wonderful thing to get out around the country. We don't do it as often as we should, to actually meet people all across this nation of ours. And when you do, you come away with an incredible sense of optimism. There's incredible strength in this country. I've mentioned the difficulties, and you could recite a list longer than probably I have to you this morning about the reason to be concerned about where things are headed. But I happen to believe that if you really listen carefully to what people are suggesting, their ideas, their sense of hope, you can't help but be more optimistic and confident. I often say to people who are running for office, whether it's a local office or a national office, there's a question that people ask us all the time that they never really articulate, but it's the most important question that someone running for public office ever gets. And the answer to the question largely determines whether or not they'll support you. And the question is not what are your views on health care, education, or fiscal policy, as important as they are. I don't minimize them. The question is the following. Mr. or Mrs. Candidate, are you listening to me? Do you know what I'm going through? Do you know what it's like to raise a family? Do you know what it is to worry about whether or not you got your job the next day? Do you have any idea of who I am? Are you paying any attention to me? And they don't ask the question directly, but that is the question. There's a great anecdote that I learned years and years ago when I first ran for Congress. And I've told this story a number of times. I've often said at the end of my public life, if this could be said about me, it would be the best monument I could ever receive. And it's the story of Franklin Roosevelt's casket being carried down Pennsylvania Avenue in April of 1945. And there's a crowd, obviously, 7 deep, 10 deep. A reporter covering the event is interviewing people on their recollections and memories of Franklin Roosevelt. And one individual seems more grief-stricken than the rest, and so the reporter assumes that this person knew Roosevelt. So he walks up, he said, how well did you know President Roosevelt? He said, I didn't know him at all. He said, well, why do you seem more grief-stricken than the rest? And he says, I didn't know him, he knew me. And I thought, what a credible thing to say, that an American president knew who this guy was. And that's what made him different to him, that he knew who he was. This guy from Hyde Park who had a life very, very different than the people he tried to lead during the Great Depression and the World War. And I've often said, if that can be said about anyone in public life, it's a pretty good testimony to your service. And so if you listen to people carefully and pay attention to what they're telling you here, it's a primal response in many ways. And then if you decide that I am listening to you, then you're going to be interested in what programs I may have that may get us moving in a different direction. And as I hear people in this country, I hear a voice of optimism and confidence. I hear people worried about where things are going, but I simultaneously hear that voice that says we can get this right. I'll tell you one more story about this. I worry terribly about where we're going as a country. In Michael's introduction, I don't know if he mentioned the fact that back in the 1960s, when I finished Providence College, I went off and joined the Peace Corps in Latin America, served in the Dominican Republic on the Haitian border. I've been asked 1,000,000 times why I did it. And the answer I've given 1,000,000 times over is very simple. Someone asked me to. Someone asked a generation of us to be involved in something larger than ourselves. And so as a result of that request, that challenge, many of us went off and did different things and came back, changed people as a result of that experience. I meet with Peace Corps volunteers everywhere I go if I travel. I offer them food and meals. They come out. They don't want to see a senator, but they're hungry, so I feed them. They have very little incomes coming in. And we have Peace Corps programs only in 2 of the Arab countries in the world. Of the 22 Arab countries, we have a Peace Corps program in Jordan and Morocco. I'm trying to get a Peace Corps program in Egypt and elsewhere. I think one of the things we need to do is become more familiar with the Muslim world, more Arabic speakers, more people who are knowledgeable about that part of the world. But nonetheless, I met with 20 Peace Corps volunteers in Jordan a few months ago that are all retired. They'd finished their 2 years. All of them fluent Arabic speakers. All of them had very positive experiences, 13 of them going on to graduate school when they come back. But I asked them the question I presume all of you would have asked them if you were sitting there having lunch with them. How are we doing? What do people think about the United States? These are people who are not diplomats. They've been serving in little villages or neighborhoods in Amman and elsewhere. And I expected them to say, you're in deep trouble here. The United States is really despised and hated because of Palestinian and Israeli issues or the war in Iraq. The answer unanimously among all of them was, no, no. There's still great, great hope. There's great admiration for the United States. I wish you could have heard them coming back. That it's not a lost cause at all. Yeah, they're disappointed. Yes, we've got serious problems. And yes, people are angry over certain policies. But I believe very deeply the world wants to see the United States lead again. We just need to get out there and start doing it, being constructive. And I'm not talking about being loved everywhere, but start rebuilding those relationships. Start reestablishing those rules of international behavior that we authored. We were the architects of after World War II. I mentioned Nuremberg. My father, the Nuremberg trials with Robert Jackson. I grew up at a dining room table with my 5 siblings where I heard all about the rule of law growing up and how important it was. My father believed, as I do, that while certainly a military buildup contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union, it was the absence of a rule of law in those countries that has much to do with the collapse of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. People who lived in those countries had as much to do with the undoing of that system as any external threat they faced at all. And to watch the United States today begin to move away from the rule of law, the vote that we took last fall on this Military Commissions Act, to walk away from habeas corpus, to walk away from the Geneva Conventions, to suggest that torture could be a permissible means by which we extract information, was a dark, dark day, in my view. We belong to a much better country than that. We ought to stand up for the Constitution. We ought to stand up for the rule of law and be heard on these issues. Thanks again. And, yeah, well, thank you again for that. But I believe that optimism is there. We just need to tap into it. I mean, I get wound up on some of these. Yes, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning, Senator.
I like that Dodd bar you got.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see you here. You
Just
came
want
by.
to advertise that.
Yeah. No, you came by my high school on the morning of the 2004 elections on your way to the polls, because we live in the same town back in Connecticut. And I always remembered that. And I thought it was very sincere. And I enjoyed your remarks then, and I've enjoyed them this morning. But my question for you is, you mentioned your support of the New Hampshire First in the Nation primary. But Hillary has said that she will, of course, continue to campaign in New Hampshire regardless of DNC rules. Will you continue to do so if the DNC throws any rules or regulations your way?
Absolutely. I'm going to live here. You're going to see me so you're going to be so sick of me up here, I'll tell you. I'm on the way. And it's, listen, I enjoy it. This is a remarkable process to go through. And it can be tiring and exhausting, but it's exhilarating as well. To hear good people who care about the country. And in my own state of Connecticut, I literally over the years have spoken at every single public high school in my state to go around juniors and seniors. So they get a chance to see a United States Senator and ask questions and talk with you. So for those of us who come from smaller states, the idea of engaging what we call retail politics is something that we're familiar with. And I've enjoyed it immensely. And young man went to East Haddam High School, Hale Ray High School in a little town I live in. I live in an old schoolhouse on the banks of the Connecticut River, about an hour and a half from here. So it's very easy to get to New Hampshire, and I'll be up quite frequently. What else? Anything else? Are we doing on time? Yes. Hey, Fran, how are you?
The voice of a woman here.
Yes, I do.
Would you support public financing to begin with federal elections?
Yeah, there is. In fact, we have a program, for presidential races. I know people are opting out of it right and left, and there's a suggestion about getting some more resources back. I would tell you this is so troubling to me about what's happening and the cost of campaigns. And it isn't just obviously the presidential race or statewide races, but it's in effect limiting the pool of people who might step forward. I'm very worried. The days of the founding of our republic when you had to be a white male that owned property to participate in the electoral process of the nation is obviously long over with. But in some ways we're getting back to a de facto situation where only people who have the personal wealth themselves or access to it. The question that was raised earlier about whether or not you actually can, the interest that can overwhelm a system here is something I worry about all the time. I've been an advocate of public financing of campaigns. Change the Constitution if you have in some ways. The idea that money is speech, I think, was one of the worst decisions we reached in the Supreme Court. I think money allows you to have a bigger voice box. And as an advocate of free speech, the idea that we limit or don't limit the ability of people to have some control over this process is deeply worrying to me. And it isn't, I'd say, just even statewide offices. The costs of running for a local office are getting overwhelming. And I'm worried that we're excluding an awful lot of people from being a part of it. So I'm a strong advocate of finding some ways here to make it possible, once again, for people to participate in the process. And hopefully that'll come. Yes, sir.
Senator, I think a lot of us think about electability perhaps more than anything else. We may love you here in New Hampshire, but the question is, will they love you in New Mexico or Nevada or South Dakota or South Carolina? You might not want to show your hand, but what's your strategy for selling yourself in other parts of the country, which may be a little different than the Northeast?
Well, you know, I'm 62 years of age. This is not a warm-up for some future run for me here. I am who I am here. This is I'm not going to go through some metamorphosis for you in the process, so I don't give a different speech in different places, and I don't think people want to hear it. I think the word authenticity has been used a lot over the years to talk about this, but I think it still rings true in a sense. You know, the answer I don't know is not a bad answer. I know people don't like to give it, or that we disagree is okay too. In a way, we're not all going to agree on things at all. In fact, the issues that I may confront as your president someday are ones that we can't even imagine sitting around at a breakfast table here this morning in New Hampshire. And so you're making decisions about character, about whether or not this person has the experience, the background, the proven ability, and the sense of judgment that will be in that seat making decisions that could affect the lives and well-being of this country and the world in which we live. And so my mission when I got, and frankly the good news is I go around and have to all these states, I find that coming from New England, this idea is not, I don't think it's a liability. I think people would care less where you're from, in a sense. This ocean somehow, because you're from a certain part of the country. Anyone who's ever looked back at elections and say, why did so-and-so lose? It was never because of where they were from. Either they connected with people or they didn't. Either there was a sense of being authentic and sincere and held views they were willing to share with people, even when you disagreed, I think is what is more important to people. And in the past, I think that's been the reason why we've succeeded or failed. As candidates from the Democratic Party or the Republican Party for that matter. I always say Democrats never understood Ronald Reagan terribly well. One of the reasons the country supported him as often as they did, even with people who disagreed with him fundamentally on issues, when they'd examine his views on the issues and their views, he still did well. One of the reasons is because Ronald Reagan had a wonderful sense of confidence and optimism, and secondly, he had a sense of direction. And he'd say to people, I'm going out that door. Now, I may go alone, but that's where I'm going. And if you'd like to come, I'd like to have your company. But that's what I believe in very deeply, and you need to know that. And that's a very reassuring quality in people in public life, in my view, that you have a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, you have a vision, and a sense of goals you'd like to achieve for the constituency you seek to represent. So I'm not worried at all. I think I can do very well in these other states because I don't think they're any different in South Carolina, Nevada, Iowa, or any other state than they are in Connecticut or New Hampshire. People want straight answers. They want what you believe in, and they want to know where you're going to take us as a country. And I welcome the opportunity to explain that to people. Thanks. How are we doing here? Listen, I'll stay for lunch if you'd like. I mean, on this thing here. Here. Well, thank you all very, very much. You've been very generous with your time and your questions, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very, very much. Very pleasant.
All the way from New Jersey.
Aren't you great to be here, I tell you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Good. Aren't you nice? Were you staying at the inn tonight?
Yes, we are.
Did they charge you extra?
It's worth it for you, right?
Oh, very good. Well, nice to see you. Did you stay for my remarks?
Lots of luck to you.
Are you going to be my coordinators in New Jersey?
Absolutely.
There you go. All right.
Thank you.
Senator, I'm Susan Ashley, New England Council.
Oh, good to see you.
Very nice to meet you. I really enjoyed your remarks.
Well, thanks.
They've asked me to get eggs for the staff, so I'm giving you 3.
I hope I didn't talk too long. Sometimes I talk too long.
Excellent.
Well, thanks very much. I love the New England Council.
Well,
And they do a great job.
I'm very proud of our New Englander of the Year.
Yeah, I know. Jim was very nice to give me that award.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All the best.
Nice to see you, too. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
What's your name?
Celia Friedman Cowan.
Nice to meet you, Celia.
Hi, Mike.
Another egg?
Yes.
These eggs are pretty hot items around here.
Pretty good, though.
Are they? You can't cook them, can you? You can't cook with those eggs.
Can I have a picture with you?
Just going to put that one on eBay.
There you go, I know. How are you?
How are you?
Good to see you this morning.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're nice to listen.
Oh, absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it, too.
Absolutely.
Hi, how
Hi,
are you?
I'm Caitlin LeMay.
Hi, Caitlin. Nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you, too.
Good Irish name. You know that's
I'm not
an Irish
Irish.
name?
I'm not
Caitlin?
Irish.
They gave you the name Caitlin. That's a good Irish name, Caitlin. And what's your ethnic background?
I'm French Canadian.
Oh, yeah, terrific. That's good.
Do you mind if I get a
I'm
picture?
happy to have a picture. Okay?
Thank you
Nice to
very
meet you,
much.
Caitlin. Other egg. What's your name?
Martin, I just had a quick question. When you talked about the U.S. returning as the leader on the world stage, is that going to be through the UN, or is that...
Well, possibly those institutions you build and lead, and that one needs reforming, by the way. It ought not to be exact, it is. But clearly, you know, the number of matters that get resolved at a place like that are tremendous. You don't read about them very often.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we only report about planes that don't fly. You know?
Right.
So the ones that actually it works out. So I believe that ought to be strengthened. The United States ought to lead more, trying to make it work. Okay. Very important. Thank you for passing. Sure you can. Thank you very much. Another egg, certainly. We got a lot of eggs to sign here, I'll tell you. David, do you want an egg sign?
I haven't compromised my checking report.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. Don't let that happen. Hi.
Hello.
What's
My
your
name's
name?
Abby Hogan.
Gabby?
Abby.
Abby Hogan.
Yes, I go to West High School.
Good. Nice to meet you, Abby.
I had one question.
Yes,
for
you may. Let me have your egg. Well, you're asking the
I
question
have
here.
one for my history teacher also.
Oh, very good. You're smart. Taking care of the history teacher.
Do you think
You
it's
want
more
me to personalize
important?
that one to him?
Yeah, sure, actually.
What's his name?
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Thompson. Oh,
Yeah.
we'll have some fun here with Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, do that. He'll like that.
Calling you in a week to see what your grade is.
And it's Abby? All right.
Yes.
I'm going to write, give Abby an A.
Well, he can't stand me missing school, so he'll think that's funny.
Yeah, right. Good job, all right?
Great. Okay.
All right, give Abby an A.
Thank you.
All right.
He'll think that's
That one for you.
hysterical.
All right. What's the question, Abby?
Do you think that foreign affairs or domestic politics are more important right now?
Well, I don't think that's a question you can't answer. They're both important, and they're interrelated. I think it's one seamless garment in many ways because, as I said, energy policy, education policy, even healthcare issues really have international implications as well as domestic. So it's really one issue, set of issues. That's why I think people this time around are paying a lot of attention to those of us who have a background and experience in international affairs and relations. I've been on the Foreign Relations Committee for 26 years. I speak Spanish. I served in the Peace Corps in Latin America. Spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I think people this time around want to know you bring that kind of background to your candidacy. It was always important. I think today it's even more important. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
bet.
It's been great.
Great. Nice to meet you, Abby. Good to see you. Be careful. Don't lose your
Yeah,
egg.
thanks.
Nice to see you. You all set? You got some eggs too?
Yep.
All right. There you go. Thanks for asking. Too. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good.
Ron Reed.
Hi, Ron. How are
Appreciated
you?
your comments today.
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Trade deficit was another.
It didn't come up. Yeah, another bill. I should have mentioned that one.
Another topic.
The context of the. Well, again, it's huge now. It's over 763 billion. And look, you know, part of it is obviously I had a hearing with Hank Paulson on the exchange rate issue, and as Bernanke said when I was in China, that's one terrific subsidy. And it costs us a lot in the manufacturing sector. When you're able to manipulate your currency, then you have a tremendous advantage when it comes to the cost of goods and services that you export and compete with us, the United States and other countries. So I'm very worried about what's happening there. And there's some suggestion that even the yen in Japan is being manipulated a bit as well. But obviously, look, as well, I think it's important that we have a global trading. I'm a strong supporter of that. But you want to also make it possible during that process that wealth gets created as a result of these agreements so that people can afford our goods and services. If it's only going to be just a transfer agreements that allow us to locate a plant someplace to be able to hire cheap labor to sell a product overseas, that's not really helping in the long run the trade opportunities that those agreements ought to provide for us. So I'm a great advocate of it. The Jordanian agreement is one that ought to be the template for a good trading agreement, in my view. And I'll be looking forward to figure out ways we can do that because we've got to be able to export our goods and services if we're going to sustain ourselves economically. So it's critically important. So thank you for raising it, too. Appreciate it. Hi, how are you?
Thank you for coming
Nice to see
today.
you. Thanks for listening, too.
Dealing with substantive issues in a substantive way.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you saying that.
It
Love to have your help.
doesn't always happen.
You live in New Hampshire?
Yep.
Am I going to have to come to your living room 10 times before I have your support?
No, maybe.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you for coming.
Nice to see you as well.
One concern I've had is we seem to be putting a lot of reliance on diplomacy.
Yeah.
And over the course of history, we see so many treaties and so many agreements that just get ignored when politics changes in those countries. Do you feel we can really rely on the treaty with
No, you got to go back and look at it. It's work all the time. Once done. I mean, this thing. I'm very, pleased they finally done something with North Korea. Now, to leave it alone after that would be a mistake.
Yeah,
in fact,
we did something with them 6 years ago.
Well, we did it in 94, and then they walked away from it in 92. The difference is today that North Korea has 4 times the amount of weapons it did 6, 7, or 5 years ago. Yeah. And so here it is, looking very much like the agreement that the Clinton administration was able to put in place. And that was not perfect, by the way. There were problems.
No, none of it
no
is,
question. But then after you get these agreements, then you have to monitor them and work with them to make sure that people are complying with them. And in many cases, they don't. So being actively involved in the world is something we've got to get back to again. The United Nations system needs to be reformed clearly to be at least more functional in a 21st century context. But the voices I hear talk about dismantling it, not making it stronger. I mean, you just can't. This is our success depends upon a world that's stable, where trading agreements can happen, where people can have jobs and work. It's in our self-interest to do this stuff. And we're acting as though it's in our self-interest not to do it. I have exactly the opposite view that these people have.
Well, I hope you're right.
Yeah, thanks
and I wish you
very
luck.
much. Appreciate it very much.
Just to let you know, Senator,
Which way are you
we have a
going
live
to go?
interview, so we
All
have
right.
to move
All right,
sign
Senator.
these
Nice to see you.
things.
Good to see you again. Thank you for your question, too, by the way.
Well, thank you for your response. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Very much. And very, very good. What do you do?
I'm work for Lincoln Financial Group in Concord. I'm a program officer there.
Good.
That's why we'd love to have you come up and
I'll
visit.
do it. Some people earlier asked me.
I gave you my card.
Good,
to
and I
sign,
like
so.
doing it. And others, I like the employees and hearing what they talk about.
I hear you.
And listening.
Yeah.
I want to hear what people think as well as asking me a question.
I appreciate that. I'm still shopping for a candidate, so you made some good points.
All right, thanks.
Thank
too.
you.
Appreciate it too. Hi.
Excellent talk today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, you were offered a lot of tough questions today, and you answered them quickly, intelligently, and with great passion. So
thanks very much.
Excellent job.
Thanks. Appreciate that very much. Hi, how are you again?
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you again.
See you again. I appreciate you supporting New Hampshire as first in the nation.
Not at all. And this is a man who works with child care.
Absolutely.
And got a private company. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this stuff and how it's working, who you're confronting, what are the needs. For years, I wrote the first child care development block grant with Orrin Hatch, and I mentioned. And the one thing we haven't done very well is quality. You do quality. I'm sure you do quality. But too often we find places they'll do better kennels. Sometimes better take care of dogs and animals better than children are. Right. And with working families today who might want to be at home but can't afford to be, having a safe, secure place where your child is tremendously important. So
that's the rewarding part of my job. We have about 2,000 child care centers around the country, and they're all very high quality. And it's been a challenge to try to locate new centers.
Why don't you
with
give
some
me a
of the
card? Do you have a card before
I
you
do.
leave, and I'll have someone get in touch? I'll talk to you about it. Thank you for your question.
By the way, the one thing that's missing, I need an autograph.
Yes.
The one thing that's missing on the national scene, and you've got it, sense of humor.
You got to be able to have some fun.
But none of them do.
No.
Including the current administration. No. The wit and wisdom would be very thin.
That's that green tie, a little Irish,
I have 25% Irish blood, but it's just enough.
Yeah. Well, it is important, as well. Hi, how are you?
Absolutely.
Good. Nice to see you.
I want to say thank you for all the work you do in Connecticut, because before I moved up here, you were my congressman, and you were senator. I just really appreciate
you mentioning that.
Yeah, and you haven't changed a bit. So.
No, thank you very much for saying so, too.
I
sign that for you?
One brief question.
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
What kind of things from your perspective have you learned from the crisis in the weather climate problems like Katrina and Rita?
Yeah, so I thought that
and
might
the
come up this
flooding
morning.
that probably had my house float down to yours.
Yeah.
A year and a half ago.
Well, look, this is. I thought the debate was over about whether or not there's a problem with climate change, but apparently some people still want to argue that this is nothing to worry about. I mean, clearly it is, and you just have to see the obvious evidence, and a lot of it has to do with our energy policy. In my view, we're still burning fuels that are dangerous, in my view, both from a health perspective as well as an environmental perspective, and climate change is something I take very, very seriously, would be deeply involved in. In fact, I would ask Al Gore, frankly, to become a czar on global change, globally, so the United States is not reluctantly engaged in this, but taking a leadership role in it, get back to that Kyoto table. Not that I would sign that one or ratify that one as written, but to walk away from it entirely was a huge mistake in my view. I'd get us back at that table, lead at that table, and really try to make a difference on those issues.
Can I ask you one more question? What about like the FEMA issues, and have you found anything that was eye-opening as far as on the federal levels?
On family?
On the FEMA. And,
FEMA issues. Well, obviously, look, this, good job, and that whatever, at Brownie,
Yes.
We need to have good leadership again back there that's thinking proactively ahead of time. We all know these problems are going to happen. We ought to be prepared for them, knowing they're going to come, rather than waiting for them to happen and then scrambling to deal with them. And obviously, the preparedness of this country for catastrophic natural disasters or man-made ones, we still have a long way to go. And this administration has not been as effective, in my view, of taking the steps to really have us prepared through our first responders and others to make sure that we can respond to those kind of situations. Katrina was a national embarrassment. The fact that this national government of ours, under this leadership, could not do a better job for the thousands and thousands of people hit by that hurricane was a disgrace, but it's indicative of what could happen elsewhere. It could happen in New England. It could happen to us.
It did.
Yeah. Well, in some way. So,
We have a live
all right.
So I'll let you go.
Thanks very much.
Say hi to Scott Kirby. Good
Hey, how are you?
How are you? Nice
Good
to
to
meet
see you.
Great job.
Thanks for being here this morning.
Fabulous.
Appreciate it
Very
very
impressed
much.
by your remarks.
No, thanks.
Connecticut Senator Christopher Dodd spoke at a breakfast just outside Manchester, New Hampshire last Friday.